So why not continuing simply with this civil society work? Because after all, we have democracies, in many countries of the world, and the world is dominated by states. It's a fact. And so without going around politics, it's just, I think, an illusion. We need the politics, and not all politicians are of bad intention. Some are bound into their own systems. They have sometimes too much to do, and I was in politics myself in Germany. I know how it is. Even with good intentions, you are attached to the daily problems, and you have rarely the time to go beyond daily work and to think globally and to construct something globally. But many countries are unsatisfied with what happens in the United Nations because the problems have to be solved by governments, after all, by governments in the world. And so the key idea is to get together, to approach a number of governments, states, who are not so happy with the United Nations, but who are not strong enough to really open their mouths by themselves. And not to ask them to take a lead to change the United Nations. No, but to chaperone a new process of civil society in the widest sense. Science, religions, businesses also, but not in a dominating position. And of course, all these wonderful NGOs or civil society groups who work already for one world change. And the process to get them together is difficult. It cannot work physically. It's too much alone. So it needs also, of course, the internet, and it needs modern communication methods. But it is not, in the beginning, an appeal to the wide public. It's an appeal to those who are engaged, to our global citizens, if you want it that way, who are actively engaged. And to find those global citizens, find these groups. I know a number myself, and most of you will have some in their heads. To find really a comprehensive list to start with, who could be invited to such a conference, chaperoned by some states. That would be the key question I would like to ask you there. That would be the next, the suggestions, yes, exactly. And which governments are to be approached is also a task, of course, but it is not that complicated. For example, I'm thinking of the Nordic states and some other small island states and so on. And it doesn't have to be the big ones, and the leading countries will not be taking part in this anyway, because they're very happy with their seats in the Permanent Security Council, and why should they bother to change anything there? Except if we find a very modern, fantastic president like Obama, he might be, I think he would. He would have problems at home. But I mean, some countries could be found who at least would chaperone such a process. No more. And of course be present, but not dominating the whole thing. But there are so fantastic people in the civil society who just have to be called by someone to focus around one group and to focus around such a situation which is chaperoned by governments would inevitably reduce the ego games. Because the ego games stand in our ways all the time. Many people who have good ideas have their ideas, fine. But I mean, to put them in a big basket and to put all these ideas together is a real human problem. And this would be helped by the fact that if governments chaperone the whole thing. That's the key idea. That's the only real novelty in this. And now, which governments can be called? Okay, I have some ideas. Maybe more ideas will come from your side. But especially add in the workshop, and maybe even here, names to, of those groups and people who could be invited. And then the next steps are relatively easy. The very simple question is, where could this be located? Well, in some neutral place in the world, Switzerland, I don't know where. But that is it just has to be solved sometime in the process, but now it's just one of the questions. And one little more tricky thing is, there will be a lot of nonsense coming out of such a group, because if so many people will work together, not everything can be done. Okay, you're going to watch already. That we need an eminent body. We need an eminent body of people who will filter the whole thing. I have one in mind who's sitting in the front row already here, but there will be more. There will be more, and these people also have to be sort of addressed, and I'm sure they would like to do it because it's an important task. Last thing is, how do we publicize this whole thing? It's the least problematic, because if this will happen, the press and the media will fully be on our side. So please, let's try, if that's possible, if not asking too much, stick to these kind of procedural questions in the workshop. Any other criticism or basic question is, of course, welcome, although I am totally convinced that if we do not approach the world changes which we need in some concrete, feasible way, there won't be any change. That's why I ask you to please cooperate constructively and with best knowledges in your minds and in your experience.
Great. Thanks a lot, Peter.